welcome to Dustin's Kaleidoscope. I am Dustin Dumas, and today I have the pleasure of being here with Virginia Lamb, who is a gardening and compost educator. Thank you so much for being here, Virginia.
Thank you for having me, Dustin. Always a pleasure to see you.
So we were talking a little bit before the show, and you were telling me that you have been doing this for a while. Like, you've been involved in gardening and recycling and composting. Yep. So if you could give us a little bit about if you could tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started, that would be fantastic, just to let our viewers know.
Okay, so I mean, as I was mentioning to you, when I was young, I was always just very, kind of loved to be in the outdoors, loved to be, in the environment, but I was growing up in North Jersey, so it was very hubbub, kind of place. So when I went to college, I was really pleased to discover this college in Stockton in South Jersey, which was in, a very rural area. So I went to college in South Jersey and studied environmental science. And then right around when I graduated, recycling had just become law in New Jersey. This dates me because it was 1987. And so I got a job in recycling, which led me to composting, and I just was always interested in gardening. So then, of course, composting and gardening go together. So
yeah. So you've had this interest for a while. Mm-hmm. How has it evolved from your standpoint?
So where these kinds of things used to be sort of a fringe thing,
right,
that people would do, and now it's much more mainstream, of course. And recently with composting, during COVID, everybody was home, right? And they weren't eating out, and they were,
right,
everybody was home. So they could see all the food waste that they were producing. So composting interest became very high, and that was great. And then for me personally, a few years ago, I went back to school, and I got a degree in soil science because I just became so very interested in the ways in which improving our soil really helps the environment.
So I know soil science and composting go hand in hand, as well as gardening.
Yeah. And
can you explain a little bit about how they are connected?
Yeah, so basically, plants grow in soil, right? And the better the health of the soil is, the better the health of the plants, right? So it's like us. If we're rested and we're well nourished, right, we can combat diseases, right? And we feel better. So it's the same way with plants. So we have to think of the soil as like a living ecosystem for the plants. And then the plants will in turn produce and feed the soil like they do. And, we can add compost into that mix. And we're creating a whole little ecosystem and a cycle there instead of just a one-way street of planting and harvesting and, moving on. And we can also, create the things that we need to put back in our garden instead of having to buy things and put them back in. Yeah, if you have a little compost pile, you can make some great compost to add to your soil every year.
Now, we've just been talking about compost, but can you explain what compost is?
Yeah, so composting is described as the organized decomposition of organic matter. Okay. Right? So it's anything that lived, anything that grew, any plant, and you can put it in a certain controlled environment. I mean, you don't have to even. I mean, in the woods, composting goes on by itself, right? Forever. They say if it wasn't for decomposition, we'd have, giant 80-foot high piles of leaf litter in the woods. Right. So it's all bacterial and fungal. There's mushrooms basically that do the work, and you just create the environment for this decomposition to happen, and then you're reducing a waste problem, right? Because there's a lot of food waste in the garbage. Like 40% of all the food we produce, we throw out. Like 30% of all our garbage is food waste. And organic waste, which can be composted. Wow. So we can solve a number of problems by composting. We can get garbage out of the waste stream. We can redirect usable food to people in need, or even animal feed operations. There's a variety of options. And we can create this great resource, which can help our soils to perform better and produce better. And one of the great benefits, we have all these big rain events now, right? These big rainstorms. Right. So healthy soil can hold a lot of moisture. Compost can really hold a lot of moisture. So if we have good, healthy soils, it reduces flooding.
I hadn't even thought of it that way.
Yeah.
And that's just due to the soil being more absorbent, or is it part of is it just a nature or characteristic of like composting, or
it is. It's a combination of factors. So if you have living roots in your soil, right? They need water like a tree. I think a mature, say, oak tree, it takes up 500 gallons of water a day.
Oh,
You know?
okay.
So every
Okay.
plant is taking up and holding water. In addition, there's all these organisms in the soil, right? Microscopic organisms, insects. They all have water in their bodies, right?
Right.
So it's a whole system where they have to take what they need, and in doing so, they're holding on to water and nutrients and then releasing them too.
So I know the second part of the show, we're going to actually get a little
gonna
hands-on.
get into it.
Exactly. We're going to get a hands-on demonstration, so I can't wait for that.
Yeah.
So if someone is actually looking at this and they're thinking, you know what, I don't have, excuse me, I don't have this gigantic yard where I can have this big, huge tumbler of like composting. Are they still able to compost as well?
Yeah, there's a lot of, levels you can do it on, right? And I feel like anything anybody does is better than
Okay.
nothing, right?
Okay.
And it's like, to me, a hopeful gesture, right? You're doing something that has a positive outcome, and it's simple. So you could do something as simple as, have an area behind your garage or next to the house where you just have a leaf pile. Right, and you let you gather up the leaves instead of putting them at the curb.
Okay.
And they break down, and then you can use the leaf compost.
Okay.
And that's going to be helpful. And you can go on up. I know you have a worm composting bin, which we're going to take a look at. And there are multiple different styles of bins that you can get. Actually, there's Essex County is having a compost bin sale this Sunday. I didn't bring the information, but I bet you can Google it.
Okay.
Oh, wait, I don't know when this is going to be on. Oops, maybe take that out. So anyway, there are a variety of containers available at different prices.
Okay.
And you can make homemade ones, and you can do food waste or yard waste, or both.
Okay.
So it's like whatever you are comfortable with and whatever you can accommodate. And in addition, there are services that will pick up like food scraps from homes.
Really?
Yeah, in our community, there's a company called Java's Compost, and they have a subscription
Okay.
service that you can, get your food scraps picked up. And we have in Maplewood, we have a pilot drop-off program. We have 70 families bringing their food scraps to our Public Works Recycling
Really?
Center. And
Okay.
we've diverted 6 tons of material from the garbage in 6 months.
Oh,
with
that's
that.
amazing. And
really
interestingly enough, I did see a Java composting truck today, and I wondered what that was. So what they're
Yep.
doing is going around and picking up
Food scraps.
and then
They
making
bring them to a composting facility out in Sussex County.
Okay.
A commercial composter, and they make it into, really nice high quality compost. They make all these
Okay.
custom blended
And
mixes.
So you explained what composting is, how we can actually compost, whether
Right.
you have a lot or, whether you have these, really big, like,
Complicated systems,
yeah, or
right?
just something simple
Yeah.
that's on your countertop. But what do you do with the compost once it has decomposed? How would one use it?
It's a good question, and some people say, well, I'd like to compost, but I don't really need compost. I don't have a garden or
Right,
whatever.
right.
But first of all, people should know that there's an 80% reduction in volume. If you started with a compost bin like this big today and you filled it, well, by the time it was broken down, it would be 20% of that volume, right? Because it's mostly moisture and
Right.
air. But having said that, you can use compost in any way that you would use any other like soil amendment. You could sprinkle it on the lawn. You could put it in houseplants. You could put it in your garden beds. You could put it around trees and shrubs. So you can just put it anywhere at all, and it's going to help improve the biology of the soil wherever you put it.
That's so great that you said that, because I think a lot of people think that if I'm composting, I'm a hardcore gardener and I have like this, rows and rows of tomatoes and squash plants and stuff like that.
Nope.
And you could use it in your ordinary house plants.
Yep.
And you just put it, make it as, you just add it to the soil on the top or.
Yeah.
Okay.
It doesn't have to inconvenience you at all. You don't have
Okay.
to like find a place for all your compost.
Okay.
As long as you have some little places to put it.
And I love the fact that you said that it goes down 80%.
Right.
And I don't think a lot of people know that. I actually knew that because I've seen a video where there's a time lapse where they've
yeah.
done it, and
Yeah.
you just see it go down to nothing.
It's incredible. Is with the worms? I've seen
Yes.
ones with the worms.
Yes, and
it's amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that's really wonderful for people to know that, even like you said, even if people are like, well, I have no use for compost, so why
Yeah.
would I even
Right.
bother doing it?
Yeah,
You
because
know.
the waste diversion aspect is really huge.
Right.
And what we're hoping, one of the things we're hoping with the pilot program is that we could then have it, so, in our two communities, people have to pay for their garbage, right?
Right.
So we're hoping that people can then negotiate. Like if they're producing a lot less garbage, like at my house, I pay for 1 can once a week. I have neighbors who pay for 2 cans twice a week.
Wow,
Right?
okay.
So you could get a reduction on your garbage fee by having less garbage. We recycle and we compost everything, so we have very little garbage.
And that's, not only is that, a savings, obviously, but it's also good for the environment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
it helps.
Yeah, and all our garbage goes to the incinerator in Essex County.
Okay.
From Maplewood and South Orange.
Okay.
And, putting this wet organic waste in the incinerator, I mean, we don't want to burden our neighbors any more than we have to.
Right.
But putting the wet stuff in there, it makes the whole process less efficient, because it's a combustion,
Right.
It's a burning. And so if we can get that wet stuff out of there, at least it makes it more efficient and cleaner to incinerate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So you've been doing this for a number of years. What?
A big number.
What keeps you through all the changes? What keeps you motivated and learning? Continuing to learn about this. What keeps you
it's just
going?
it's such a dynamic thing, and I mean, gardening alone, I feel like it's never something you finish learning about, and I work with farmers, and I'm really interested in the way that agriculture can be changed to have a less environmental impact and that kind
Right.
of thing. So it's just there's so much potential for learning and curiosity and growth.
So we have a couple of minutes. So could you tell, before we go to the next segment, could you tell us a little bit about how you help farmers?
Yeah, so I've worked in a few different capacities, but basically with a few different organizations, working with farmers to do practices that will help them use fewer chemicals, will help them, optimize their soil health. So working with them to plant a cover crop in the winter so the soil isn't bare, right? So they plant a crop that stays in the ground over the winter, and then you have all that organic matter going into the soil over the winter, so the soil's more stable and so forth. And not tilling, like when you till up the soil, it's very disruptive to the soil.
Really?
Biology, it releases carbon dioxide. Yeah, so to work with them on a variety of practices that just sort of reduce the impact that they're making. Yeah.
I knew nothing about that. That's very interesting.
Yeah, that's
because
super cool.
and I know we only have like about 30 seconds right now, but I do have a question about, you mentioned the winter crops. Would you do that even in places where they have snow?
Yeah, you can do it in cold places. I mean, I think I was just reading about Minnesota
Really?
and the cover crop initiatives there. Yeah, because there are, crops that are more winter hardy, but even if you got them in the fall and they died in the winter, they still would have all the roots in the ground from when they started growing. So there's a whole variety of things that you can do. Yeah, but we work with farmers to do winter rye, and that survives the winter. And then we went out, the spring, and some of them had rye that was 6 feet tall that they then mowed down and planted their corn in there, and it's pretty amazing.
That's very fascinating. I think it is, just because it's just part of the whole ecology. So at this point we're going to stop, but we'll be right back. I'm Dustin Dumas. This is Dustin's Kaleidoscope, and we will be right back.
It's an onion.
and welcome back to Dustin's Kaleidoscope. I am here with Virginia Lamb, who is a gardening and compost educator. And the first part of the show, we were talking about your background and the importance of composting and gardening and just overall soil maintenance. And now we have before us a lot of different things that hopefully you can share with us and tell us the importance of. So where should we start, Virginia?
Well, let's start with the beginning to compost. Right?
Okay.
Now, all the things that you would put in a compost pile are all the living things, all plant matter. So in my kitchen, this is my actual, because I know you, we have a relationship. I brought my own personal garbage. So this is my kitchen scrap bucket that I keep on the kitchen counter. Okay. And then we put all our organic material in there, all our peels and, you see eggshells and coffee grinds and some soiled paper, tea bags. I got the strawberry tops, any plant trimmings, anything like that, any food, we're throwing out even. Okay. We just don't put in here meats, fats, oils, dairy. We don't put animal products in here, right? Okay.
And why is that?
Because they are more likely to attract pests.
Oh,
when you compost outdoors. Right?
Okay.
So yeah, no, and actually even indoors with the composting with worms, it's I think it's like harder for them to process that stuff. Okay. So they recommend you don't put that stuff in a worm.
Got it.
Just plants, right? Okay. And so these materials are high in an element called nitrogen, right? Okay. They're called the greens, even though they're not all green. All right. Likewise, these are high nitrogen materials. Okay. Leaves. This is outdoor material, grass clippings. And then these materials are high in carbon. And these are called, do you want to guess what color these are called?
Brown.
These are called the browns. You can't get it by you. Yeah, that's right. So we have the greens and the browns, the nitrogen and the carbon. And if there's only one thing anybody ever remembers about composting, it's that you should have a ratio between these two categories of material of 1 part nitrogen to 3 parts carbon.
Oh, okay.
Right? So that's going to keep your pile oxygenated. It's going to keep the fresh food scraps covered, so there's not any sort of smell or anything like that. And it's going to keep the composting happening quickly in a high oxygen environment. So then you won't get bad odors, and things like that. I always use the example of when you mow the lawn, sometimes people bag the clippings and then they put them in a pile. Right. And quickly they smell really bad. Right. Because the oxygen goes out because it's such fine.
Oh, it's all compacted
together. The oxygen goes out, and then a group of bacteria that make methane, they're called methanogens, they come in and they compost in a low oxygen environment, and it stinks and it's slow. So we want to encourage this like oxygen rich composting. So how would that look? At home, you would go, here's a little mini version of a compost bin. Okay. This is just small. You would really have one that was like 3 feet tall by maybe 3 feet wide. Okay. And you'd go out there and I'm not going to dump this whole bucket, but just to give you an idea, you'd go out there, you'd dump your kitchen scrap bucket. Right. And then you'd take, and you'd put in some of your green garden waste on that. And then you would take your carbon, your high carbon, dry brown materials, and you want to cover what you just put in there. Right? So you're making kind of a lasagna. Okay. And then you would just continue doing that. You can use also shredded paper.
Does it matter if it actually has color on it, or?
Yeah, you don't want to really use, it doesn't matter if a newspaper has color. Yeah. Because they're made with plant-based dyes. Long ago, all the newspapers in the Northeast, they all agreed to just use plant-based dyes. Perfect, okay. But you don't want to use shiny paper, really bright colored paper. Okay. I would say the Captain Crunch box, that's like mercury, dye in there. So yeah, shredded office paper is fine. Okay. Cardboard, like the pizza boxes, how we can't recycle the greasy pizza box cups. That's right. So I like to put those in the compost, or I like to put those down on areas that I want to mulch.
That's a great
idea. Put the mulch on top so it suppresses the weeds.
And it's great for invasives too.
It's great for invasives too, exactly. So you just keep doing that.
And how often? Do I do it weekly, or do I do it once a month?
I go out when my container is filled, which is probably every 3 or 4 days at our house.
Oh, okay.
Right? All right. Because you don't want to leave it sitting for too long on your counter. It might start to get a little smelly. Okay. Another nice thing to do, though, is just put a few folds of newspaper in the bottom, and that absorbs excess moisture. Okay,
because you're always continually taking it from the top, so that the newspaper at the bottom will suck up.
It's going to soak up all the extra liquid, yeah, because this is a lot of, very wet material.
Okay.
So you would do this layer, 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 and it will continue to drop down and drop down.
Okay.
But then at some point it's going to get full, right?
Right.
And so then what you would do is like lift off your container, put it down here next door, flip over anything that's not done, and then you would get to the bottom and you would have finished compost.
Oh, wow.
It's pretty amazing. So the way I think is the easiest way to do it is to have 2 compost bins. So you
Okay.
fill one and then you let it sit, you fill another one, and then by the time you go back to the first one, it's compost. No mixing, no stirring, no, people always talk about all the mixing and stirring.
Right.
You don't have to do, I don't do anything to my compost. I just layer it in there, and once a year I come and take a bunch out.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because people make such a big deal about, you have to stir, you have to, and I think for people who are new to it, they're like, I'm not doing that.
I don't have time, right?
Exactly, that's too much work.
Yep,
But
I agree.
love how you said having like 2 different.
If you have the space, yeah.
Because you could even if you don't have, like, you can make it, you can accommodate your space, meaning
Yeah,
that you can
yeah.
make it smaller.
Right,
I like that,
exactly.
because that
It's
way it's
super easy.
simple. So
And dimple.
yeah, and dimple, yes.
Yeah.
That's so great. And the ratio again is the browns
3 parts
to
to
the
1
one
part.
part. Okay.
And that is the key to success. That and the ingredient list. Like
Okay.
of not putting in the animal products and
Right.
things like that. So it's really best to have just what they call prep waste, like the pre-cooking waste.
Okay.
Not the plate waste, not the greasy salad
Oh,
dressing,
right,
sauces,
right,
things like
right.
that. That's the best way to do it.
Okay.
So, and if you ever read about composting, they talk about the right volume, the right surface area, which means materials are chopped up. But everything is going to fall into place if you have the right ratio and the right ingredients.
Okay.
Nothing else matters.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's I'm glad. That's
Yeah.
a great tip to have.
Super easy. And then every time you put food waste in here, if you're doing food waste or any green waste, you cover it up with the brown to make sure you just have the ratio right there. You're not going to forget.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you have this lovely compost
Yeah.
at the end. And as you were explaining in the first segment, you can use it anywhere. You can use it in your house plants. You can use it in your garden. You can
Yep.
use it
On your lawn.
On your lawn. So
You could go to the park and put it around a tree if you want to do a little guerrilla composting.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so that's great, and it's always it's just it's nice to have. It's nice to have, and like you said,
is.
I'm just gonna remind people what you said earlier, that even if you don't think you need composting because you don't have a garden or whatever,
Yeah.
it still is a great way to get that 80% of waste down to 20%.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're transforming it into this beneficial product,
Right.
which feeds the organisms in the soil,
Right.
and then helps them make nutrients available.
Exactly.
And so I don't use any fertilizer at
Oh,
home,
okay.
because the compost is like a soil conditioner.
Okay.
Like, so say now you're just talking about the ways in which you
Yes.
can use the compost. So I bought these, at a little roadside plant stand.
Uh-huh.
So there's some little lettuce plants. You could plant this whole pot, but I usually break it away a little bit. So I'll go, out in my garden. I'll dig a little hole for this plant, and I'll fill it with compost, right? And then tuck it in there. And so those roots have a really nice start. The soil's
Okay.
not hard, right?
Right.
And the other thing about, helping the soil be healthier is that you really shouldn't go out there in the spring and rototill your soil.
Okay.
You should just limit your digging and your turning to where you're planting.
And why is that?
Well, because you want to have this biology going on in the soil. So if you have roots growing, all these roots, the plant is taking in energy from the sun, and it's making these different compounds, and it's putting all that organic matter in the soil, and then that's feeding all these soil organisms.
Okay.
So I recently heard someone say, so if you are going out every spring and turning the soil over, that would be like if someone came to your house and ripped the roof off every spring and shook it around,
That's
so
a great analogy.
right? So you want to kind of make this nice environment for these soil organisms, and then they pay you back by helping the plants be healthier.
Okay.
Yeah,
So when
it's really
should
amazing.
you till, or should you till?
You should only till when you have very compacted soil.
Okay.
Or like at farms they call it like a hard pan. There's a very hard surface below the surface.
Okay.
But really, in a home garden situation, maybe I was going to say like a new construction. Sometimes the soil's really bad,
right,
but
right.
still better to just layer on top. Like we moved into our house here in Maplewood, almost 20 years ago now, and the soil was terrible. It was gravelly, and the person who lived there only had like the chemical lawn service.
Oh,
It was
okay.
hard as a rock. It was
Okay.
terrible. We put in compost and mulch over the years, and now our soil's really nice. We just kind of went on top of what was there.
Wow.
Yeah, just kind of go build up.
That's good for people to hear, because I think
Yeah.
people will think like, well, if I have this really hard
It's discouraging.
soil. Yeah, exactly.
It's very discouraging. And another benefit is that if you're not sure what's in the soil, and if you're worried about
Right.
contamination, you know, just go above, and then you
Oh,
don't have
okay.
those issues. Like in urban areas, a lot of
Yes.
times that's a concern.
Exactly.
And even where in my house, it was an old house. It's like a 100-year-old house, and so there was lead paint, right, in the
Oh,
day.
right.
And so I had my soil tested for lead around the house because I had a little vegetable garden,
Okay.
and it came back really high for lead.
Wow.
So I don't grow food close to the
In
house
that
like that
area.
anymore.
Okay.
I could do it if I had a raised up bed.
Okay.
But yeah,
Okay.
that was quite eye-opening.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I also wanted to talk a
Oh,
little
about your
bit about the
worms.
worms.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So there's so many different ways to compost.
right.
And you're doing this indoor composting with the worms, the red worms.
Yeah.
Very
So
specific
just
kind of
I just
worm.
want to let people know that I do not compost in this. I just brought this in because my composting bin is very big, and I just wanted to get a few worms. So these are red.
This is a sample.
Yes.
Little sub-sample of worms. Yeah.
Yes.
They're called red wigglers, and
Yeah.
they're wiggling around like that.
Right.
And they, as you know, they eat like half their weight in food every day.
Right.
So if you had a container where you had a pound of them, they
Right.
could actually process a half a pound, like a deli container,
Right.
half a pound of food waste every day. And then they reproduce like nuts. So every 6 months out of 2 worms, you get 90 worms.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it is
And
pretty
I notice they
amazing.
like to hide at the bottom.
Yes,
you
they
know,
do.
Of
they're
my
living. They're
composting
living
bin.
deep in the soil. Oh, poor guy. Hi, we won't bother you too much anymore. But
this
yeah, it's a
is-
great way to compost. I used to do a lot of programs with schools, and they'd have the worm bin in the classroom, and they could weigh the food waste and
Right.
count the worms, and you can see they reproduce by little eggs. It's like a
Right.
whole lot of really
So
interesting
you
stuff.
mentioned the eggs, and I know they're the castings and things like that. So if somebody has if somebody wanted to start a composting bin using the red wigglers, what should they do?
I would just get a shallow, like a Rubbermaid bin, like
Okay.
a 8-gallon maybe they are.
Yep.
You know, they're about this deep. I would drill holes around the sides,
Okay.
fill it with shredded paper,
Okay.
and then, I should have said this first, you need to mail order those worms. You need to buy them from a worm supplier.
Okay.
Right? Just make sure they're the right worms.
Yes,
The red worms,
yes,
the red wigglers,
yes.
they're called manure worms as
Right.
well. So then you would moisten this. You could
Okay.
spray it with a spray bottle,
Uh-huh.
fill up the bin with the paper, fill it
Okay.
up to its depth, and then put the worms in. Let them get acclimated.
Mm-hmm.
But then after a couple of days, you can just start putting your food scraps in, like every day, just like
Okay.
you do, right?
Yeah. Exactly. So
And it doesn't smell, right?
no, not at all.
Like soil.
Not at all.
And same thing, ingredient list important
Yes.
with the worms. And yeah, it's pretty miraculous that these worms. I was once at an event, like a fair, an environmental fair, and this woman was so fascinated talking about the worms, and she said to her husband, "Come over here, listen to this. These worms, they make this out of the food. Isn't that amazing?" And he was like, "It's not amazing. It's just what happens." You know? It's kind of funny, but she was amazed. So
Wow.
I
Well,
thought that was great.
Virginia, we didn't get a chance to get to the organic fertilizer.
we'll have to do another time.
We'll have to do another one. But thank you so much for coming on. This was such a great show for people who are interested in ecology and wanting to know how to do better, with their soil and
Yeah.
things like that.
It's an easy way to make a big change. Yeah.
Is there anything that you'd like to leave us with? We have we've run out of time. So, but
Okay. Well, I just think it's like any little gesture you do. These are kind of overwhelming times, but a little hopeful gesture, it can make a big impact, and it can go a long way towards helping you as well. So,
thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
joining us. This has been wonderful. I'm Dustin. This is Dustin's Kaleidoscope, and we will see you next time. Bye.